Hello, and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession, and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care, and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we'll be speaking to a well-known guest to find out about how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. This is a very special Great Daffodil Appeal edition of the podcast. Throughout March, Marie Curie turned the nation yellow with their biggest annual fundraising campaign. And to mark it, today's guest is a long-standing Marie Curie supporter. He's an English actor and producer who's played some of the best-known and most loved characters in British film history. His career includes 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Bridget Jones's Diary, Love Actually, Paddington 2, and most recently, The Gentleman. He lives in London with his wife Anna, and credits becoming a father with changing his outlook on life. Hugh Grant, welcome to the podcast. Hugh, welcome to the Marie Curie Couch.
How lovely to be here.
Can I ask if you've had a significant death in your life, and are you happy to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, the most significant death, I suppose, was my mother's death, which was in 2001. And when she suddenly got pancreatic cancer, and she survived about a year from diagnosis until she died. And one thing that made her death infinitely better than it could have been was Marie Curie, and that's why I've always been a massive fan of the charity.
What made it better?
Well, the big thing is that they give you the opportunity to die at home, which, as I recall from when I was sort of campaigning for Marie Curie, is something that most people want to do, and is quite difficult to do without assistance. And so she went home, and she had these amazing nurses who mainly did the nights, as I recall, and were just brilliant. I mean, not only in terms of being professional as nurses, with all the nursey stuff you have to do, but just as people. They were, just perfect for my mother, because she got to know them all very well. She was quite chatty, my mum. She got to know every last detail of their, home lives, personal lives. And I think she had a laugh with them, actually. And I was just so full of admiration for them, because if you put it on paper, that job to go and look after people in their last days and hours before they die, when they're not in their best state, and during the night, is on paper looks like a miserable job. But what astonished me was, I honestly think they may have been some of the most, I don't want to say happy, but certainly contented in their work people I've ever met.
Hmm. Was it important for your mum to be at home?
Yeah, I think it was. And that was very nice, because, you can get the family round, and we did all that, and, people came from far and wide to sort of see her, and I suppose say goodbye. That's I'm not sure anyone did say goodbye. Maybe that was a little sort of blunt, but it was effectively saying goodbye, yeah.
Were there conversations that you'd had? So did you and your mum talk about her death and her end of life?
Yeah, I mean, she's definitely talked about her funeral. She was absolutely determined to have certain hymns and certain pieces of music at her funeral, which I gave her, although I did cheat. I put in a couple of other pieces which she didn't want, but which were brilliant. My choices were better than hers, is really what I'm saying. What was that other thing? Her other thing is that she wanted everyone to be very sad. She said, I don't want everyone turning up and having a laugh. And actually they were very sad. The funeral itself was incredibly sad. But at the drinks afterwards, I think it was nice to get the whole family together. And because she was a very kind of funny, upbeat person. You know, it was very appropriate that the party was quite fun.
When your mum was first diagnosed, is that something that she was open about with everyone and told you all and told the people around her?
Yeah. It was a Friday night, and I just got a call. I knew she'd had jaundice and some various other symptoms and stomachache, and she went and got the results of some tests on a Friday night with my dad, and then she rang me up and said, it's not very good news. It's pancreatic cancer, and I didn't know much about pancreatic cancer. And I said, well, what's the prognosis on that one? She said, well, it's horrible. And it was, it's one of the worst you can get, as you will know. And you basically don't have very long unless you do this massive operation. And there was a lot of debate about whether to bother to do that. And in the end, she did do it. And it gave her, I think, about another year.
How was that for you? Hearing about her diagnosis,
the
year she had to live.
Well, it is a massive shock, and I just felt, how do you make this better? It's very bleak news. I remember going round, and the next day we sort of went for a walk as a family in Zion Park, and it's just an odd thing hanging over. You were talking quite normally, but it's an odd thing to think the Grim Reaper is hanging over this walk as we speak. But, she was still capable of great laughs throughout the whole thing. She was particularly appalled by some of the, very well-meaning letters and cards she got, which were much too gloomy. They were those horrible cards with sort of candles on the front saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. They're basically saying, I'm so sorry you're dead. And certainly for her, they struck completely the wrong note. She called them the ghouls. But they were well-meaning, I guess. But I think there is an element, and you've probably come across this, seeing as this is your field, where people just slightly enjoy it because they like a bit of drama in their lives.
And I think that thing about kind of getting it right, the design on a card. I mean, it's
no wreaths.
Do we have to go for those cards, with a sort of candle of the sunset on the front, or can we go for a card that might represent the individual?
Yeah, much better.
Or something that they're interested in.
Much better.
I kind of think I prefer that as well.
Yeah.
So you just talked about your mum's funeral.
Yeah.
Afterwards, can we talk a bit about bereavement and grief? What helped you?
Well, I'm not sure. It's a very strange thing, grief, because in my experience anyway, it hits you at the oddest and most embarrassing times, and doesn't hit you at other times when you think it might. For me, it was certain triggers were pieces of music, because she always played the piano, and particularly when she was tired, and she played a couple of her standard pieces were bits from a ridiculous old 1950s musical called Salad Days, which was her first date with my father in the 50s, and these were the pieces of music that I made the organist play, and they're very jolly, upbeat pieces of music, which was quite odd for as the coffin's being carried out of the church, but that was the bit that set everyone off, including me. That was the saddest. And those pieces of music still have that power now to make me feel quite sad. And then other weird things, just going about in your normal life, chatting about something. My mother had a very strange relationship with our cat. And sometimes my dad still talks to this cat, even though the cat's been dead for many years as well. That can sometimes set me off. Or I think how sad it is that my mum never met my kids. That's sad.
And what helps you? What has helped you at those times?
I just think...
Do you talk about it?
No, not well. Yeah, a bit with my brother and things like that. But I wouldn't say we sort of talk about it too much. It's mainly just keeping. As I keep saying, she had a great sense of humour, and so it's keeping a sort of sense of humour about the whole thing. And it's incredibly bad luck. You get cancer, you die.
I was just thinking about that, because some people do talk about it. Some people do talk about their grief and find that very helpful. Some people can talk about it endlessly. And
it's odd. Some people are completely polaxed by it. I have a German friend who, his mum died, and really, for 10 years he couldn't think or talk about anything else. It's quite odd. I think it's different. Different people react in different ways.
What we know in our work is depending on our relationship with the person, then sometimes our experiences and our grief can be different.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, they just mentioned your brother, and we know sometimes even in the same family, people will have different relationships even with parents.
Yeah.
So therefore they'll have a different experience of bereavement and grief. Doesn't mean they can't support each other, of course, but we'll just have a different experience.
Yeah. I think his has been fairly similar to mine. But the person, we're really watching out for all the time is my dad, left on his own. And, trying to make sure he's okay. And, he's old school, sort of ex-army officer. So I think, naked exhibitions of grief quite unlikely to come from him. But I do remember the moment my mum's body was taken out of the house, Dad said, I don't want to see this bit. And he just watched from a window inside. And I remember thinking that was interesting, that he didn't want to deal with that particular bit. And then I think, it's coming back to me now, one of the things that gets one through those first weeks after death is practicalities, organising a funeral. It's quite helpful. It fills your days. Thinking about, mundane things like what vol au vent should we have at the reception. So I think that helped a bit. And then, for me, I have tried to do some things that she might approve of since she died, like helping when I spent a few years helping with Marie Curie, and I've done some other stuff. And my mum was a teacher and in the state sector. And her big thing was she felt very strongly that kids from the primary school where she taught, the bright ones, the able ones, were not getting an opportunity to go to some of the really good West London schools because of finance. And so, again, to try and sort of do something in her memory, I've helped with that. I've set up some scholarships, and they're named after her. And then there's a great friend of hers who had a daughter my age with a learning disability, and we set up a special residence for people like her down in Kent, again named after my mother. And all those things kind of helped. Doing something that you think they would have approved of is helpful.
And how nice, kind of just from a legacy point of view, to have her and what was important to her continuing to live on. Yeah.
Hopefully.
As I said earlier, part of our campaign is about encouraging people really to kind of talk a bit more about death and dying and plan for it. And I'm just wondering whether your dad talks about his own death and whether he's talked to you about that, or whether that's something that's not discussed.
No, he's always saying, well, I haven't got long. And being, as I say, a military man, it's all planned down to the last dot and comma of everything. It's
Right.
he keeps sending new files of, this is what happens. He calls it the wash up after death. Read carefully. So we've got a lot of those files. And but it's hard because my mum died when she was 63. Dad's now 92, I think, and some of those decisions when they're that old have to be made. I wanted to say for them, but I'd say with them.
So if the files keep coming and he keeps changing in his mind, you might just
you
might refile some of them.
All that.
And can I ask Hugh, just to move on a bit, about what we know in our work is that when people are grieving, bereaved, or they're supporting someone who's dying, they're often faced with their own mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's hard. I wondered, do you ever think about your own death? Do you ever talk about it?
Yeah. I have a lawyer who never stops badgering me about it. She wants to do the will. And that is important. Now suddenly I've got 5 children. You've got to sort that out. And I'm always saying to my wife, if I lose my marbles or can't go to the loo, shoot me. And she says, please do the same.
And there's something there about maybe, is it a concern about suffering at the end? Because that's
what's the point of that?
Lots of people have that concern.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Who wants to suffer, and who wants to see someone you love suffer? And you have to carry them to the loo. And that was one of the weird moments when my mum was dying. She, one of these nurses was wonderful and had a bedpan and all that, and that had been going on for weeks. My mum never left her bed, and then suddenly, the day she died, she astounded us all by just getting out of bed and walking quite normally across the room to the loo. Anyway, we stopped her and carried her the rest of the way. But that was a big surprise.
So you're working on writing your will.
Yeah.
Have you planned your funeral or talked about it or thought about it?
Well, only casually. Yeah. I think funerals, to me anyway, I find them a bit Victorian and depressing. All that paraphernalia that's sort of been with us for a couple of 100 years now is a bit icky. I think, for me, I don't particularly want to be there in a box with everyone standing making sad faces and a black tie around me. I'd rather they took me away and got rid of my body, and then people can have some kind of party. But I think the whole funeral hearses, and I think even burials doesn't appeal to me.
So maybe cremation?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Have you told those close to you that that's what you want?
Yeah, but I don't know if anyone took me seriously. I mean, I know where I'd like to be scattered. But
you can write that stuff down in your will.
Yeah, quite.
You can put the basics in there at least.
Yeah.
And so at least it's documented.
Yes.
For anybody listening, Hugh, is there anything, if anybody's bereaved or caring for someone who is living with a terminal illness, is there any words of advice or wisdom, but anything you might say, something that helped?
Well, if they're struggling and they need help, go to Marie Curie. I'd say that for sure. They really were astonishing. I know I keep saying it, but they were. And otherwise, I don't know that there is anything you can really say. It's bloody awful. That's what I always say to people who get a terminal illness, or someone in their family gets a terminal illness. It's ghastly. There's no point pretending it isn't.
Is legacy something that's important to you?
I never really know what that buzzword means exactly. What people think of me after my death.
Or how you might like to be remembered.
Yeah. Well, I can't control. The problem for me is people who know me and have known me will remember who I really was, but I won't be able to control what's out there on the internet now, and may not be entirely true. And I slightly dread that becoming hardened fact after my death. But I'm not making any efforts to control my legacy. It is what it is. And to a certain extent, what do I care? I'm dead.
I was just thinking about your mum again there, because actually all those things that have been put in place after she's died, you were describing the sort of residential home for people with learning disabilities named after her, and other things, how it gives a sense of the woman she was and what was important to her.
Yeah.
That's what I think I mean by legacy.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, I don't know. I suppose my legacy is my children, and I'm trying to drill into them, some of my better values. I've got terrible values as well, but I try to get the better ones into them. So they do as I say, not as I do. And then, that's what you leave behind. That's what nature intended. They're my... they have my genes on the one hand, and also, I hope I will have drilled some stuff into them that's positive rather than negative. And that's it. That's your main legacy.
Hugh Grant, thank you so much for joining us on the Marie Curie Couch. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, thank you very much.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie Couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. This podcast is made by Marie Curie, a national charity that supports people affected by terminal illness. During March, we're celebrating the Great Daffodil Appeal, so please donate and wear a daffodil pin to show your support for all the work we do. You can find out more on our website, mariecurie.org.uk, where you can also find details of the information and support that we offer. The podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Sound and Vision. This episode was recorded at Grand Central Recording Studios, and the music featured is Time Lapse by Pan Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.